This presentation is about the urinary system. We will look at the function and physiology of the kidneys and their role in urine production. We will also look at the negative feedback mechanisms that are activated when we become dehydrated and the role of the urinary system in maintaining homeostasis. The urinary system consists of the kidneys, which are the principal organs, and accessory organs of ureters, urinary bladder, and urethra. The function of the urinary system is to regulate the content of blood plasma in order to maintain homeostasis of the internal fluid environment. The kidneys are roughly oval-shaped with a medial indentation called a hilum, which we'll see on the next slide. They're approximately 11 centimetres long by 7 centimetres wide and 3 centimetres thick, and are located behind the parietal perineum, or retroperitoneally. Kidneys lie on either side of the vertebral column, partially protected by the lower ribs, and the superior surface of each kidney is capped with an adrenal gland. They're surrounded by 3 layers of tissue, making a fibrous capsule that provides protection and anchors the kidney to surrounding structures. The main internal structures of the kidneys are the renal cortex and the renal medulla. Medullary tissue forms renal pyramids, and the papilla at the tip of each pyramid releases urine through multiple ducts into a cup-like structure called a calyx. Minor calyces join to form a major calyces, which join together to form the renal pelvis. The renal pelvis acts as a collection basin to drain urine from the kidney before narrowing as it exits the kidney at the hilum to become the ureter. The kidney is supplied with blood via the abdominal aorta. The renal artery branches off the abdominal aorta. This will divide into increasingly smaller arteries until they become interlobular arteries, which penetrate the cortex and supply individual nephrons. From here, blood flows back through veins in increasing size as they merge to eventually drain directly into the renal vein. The renal vein exits the kidney at the hilum and connects with the inferior vena cava to return filtered blood to circulation. The bulk of kidney tissue is made up of approximately 1 million nephrons. These are the functional and structural units of the kidney that filter blood to form urine. They consist of a renal corpuscle and renal tubules. The renal corpuscle is located within the cortex of the kidney. It is made up of the glomerulus, a network of capillaries surrounded by a filtration membrane tucked inside a Bowman capsule. The renal tubules are the proximal convoluted tubule, the Henle or the nephron loop, which has a descending limb and an ascending limb, and the distal convoluted tubule, or the DCT. It also has a collecting duct. This tubule is shared by many nephrons. It converges with other collecting ducts in the same renal pyramid to form one tube that opens at the renal papilla into a minor calyx. Each corpuscle has an afferent arteriole entering the glomerular capsule and an efferent arteriole exiting the glomerular capsule. This will extend to the peritubular blood supply and become either vasorector or peritubular capillaries. It is also worth noting the juxtaglomerular apparatus. These are located where the afferent arteriole brushes past the DCT. It is made up of macula densa and juxtaglomerular cells, and it surrounds the afferent arteriole. The primary role of kidneys is to process blood and form urine. This is done in the nephron through 3 processes. Filtration, the movement of water and protein-free solutes from plasma into the glomerulus in the capsule space. Tubular reabsorption, movement of molecules out of the tubule and into peritubular blood. And tubular secretion, movement of molecules out of peritubular blood and into the tubule for elimination. Filtration, the first stage of urine production, occurs in the renal corpuscles of nephrons. The mechanism of filtration is passive and occurs due to the hydrostatic pressure created because the efferent arteriole that exits the corpuscle is narrower than the afferent arteriole that enters the corpuscle. A filtration membrane surrounds the glomerular capillaries and permits filtration of water and small solutes, but it prevents most plasma proteins, blood cells, and platelets because they are too large to pass through the membrane. It is selective only with regard to size. It is composed of 3 layers: fenestrations or pores in the capillary wall, podocytes. These cells have pedicels, which are tiny feet-like projections from the cell body that sit tightly packed together to form filtration slits, and a basement membrane that prevents the filtration slits from enlarging under pressure. The glomerular filtration rate, or the GFR, is the rate of filtrate produced by both kidneys per minute. It is determined mainly by glomerular hydrostatic pressure and is directly related to systemic blood pressure. A normal GFR is approximately 105 to 125 mL per minute, or up to 180 litres of fluid per day. 99% of this filtrate will be reabsorbed. Glomerular filtration is controlled intrinsically, also called autoregulation, by mesangial cells, which regulate and maintain hydrostatic pressure and how much surface area there is available for filtration. The GFR is also controlled extrinsically through neural and hormonal mechanisms, which we will cover in more detail later. Tubular reabsorption is a second step in urine formation. The purpose of tubular reabsorption is to selectively recover useful materials from the filtrate. It is hormonally regulated and occurs as a result of passive and active transport mechanisms in all parts of the renal tubules. Tubular secretion is the third stage of urine production and involves the movement of substances out of the blood and into tubular fluid for elimination from the body. It happens in reverse to tubular reabsorption, and like reabsorption, different parts of the tubules specialize. It is also selective and also hormonally regulated. Filtrate will move out of the capsular space into the proximal convoluted tubule, or the PCT. This is where a major portion of reabsorption takes place, approximately 65%. The endothelial cells lining the PCT have microvilli that greatly increase their surface area, along with a leaky apical epithelium, making it permeable to water and solutes. We can see that sodium is actively transported out of the tubule and into blood. Whilst reabsorption of glucose, amino acids, chloride, phosphate, and bicarbonate ions move passively into the blood. Small proteins will also be reabsorbed via pinocytosis, and water is reabsorbed passively via osmosis. Next is the Henle or nephron loop. Approximately 15% of water in the glomerular filtrate will be reabsorbed, along with about 60% of the sodium and chloride ions remaining in the tubular fluid. The descending limb is permeable only to water, but not to solutes, and the ascending limb is permeable only to solutes, but not to water. Roughly half the volume of the tubular fluid that enters the nephron loop is reabsorbed in the descending limb, which will also secrete urea via diffusion. Following the Henle loop is the distant convoluted tubule, or the DCT. The amount of water reabsorbed along the DCT and collecting duct is controlled by circulating levels of the antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Under normal conditions, in the absence of ADH, the DCT and collecting duct are impermeable to water. Reabsorption of water in the collecting duct will impact the concentration of urine as it makes its way out of the kidney. The DCT and collecting ducts secrete potassium, hydrogen, and ammonium ions. Secretion of hydrogen ions will increase with increased blood hydrogen ion concentration. Tubular reabsorption and secretion are regulated by hormones. The main hormones are angiotensin II, which increases reabsorption of sodium and water, aldosterone, which is secreted by the adrenal cortex, increases DCT reabsorption of sodium. The antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, influences selective or facultative reabsorption of water and sodium. Remember, under normal circumstances, it is impermeable to water. The atrial natriuretic hormone, or ANH, is secreted by heart muscle fibers and promotes a loss of sodium via urine. It opposes aldosterone and causes kidney to reabsorb less water and increase production of urine. The parathyroid hormone, or PTH, from the parathyroid glands increases calcium reabsorption and potassium secretion. We will look closer at some of these shortly. Each of the two ureters carry urine from the renal pelvis through the hilus of the kidneys down to the urinary bladder. The lining of the ureter has wide, deep folds that reduce the size of the lumen. They have an inner mucus layer, two smooth muscular layers, and an outer connective tissue layer that's continuous with the renal capsule. The urinary bladder is a hollow muscular reservoir for storing urine until it is expelled from the body. It sits below the peritoneum and behind pubic bones. In women, the bladder is inferior to the uterus. In men, the bladder is superior to the prostate gland. It can hold approximately 800 ml of urine, although it will feel full with less. The bladder wall consists of smooth muscle called the detrusor muscle. When the bladder is empty, most of the internal surface falls into the folds called rogae, apart from a triangular region called the trigone. This region remains rigid and smooth to avoid damaging the ducts of the ureters and the urethra. The urethra is a small mucous membrane-lined tube extending from the trigone to the exterior of the body, passing through the pelvic diaphragm. It consists of an outer muscular layer and an inner mucosal layer. There are two urethral sphincters, an internal sphincter under involuntary control and an external sphincter under voluntary control. In females, the urethra lies posterior to the pubic symphysis and anterior to the vagina, and it is approximately 3 to 4 centimeters long. In males, the urethra is 18 to 20 centimeters long and is made up of 3 distinct sections, as we can see here. The process of urination is called micturition and is a spinal cord reflex that can be controlled voluntarily. The stimulus for the reflex is the stretching of the detrusor muscle as the bladder fills. When urine volume reaches 2 to 400 ml, the stretching will generate sensory impulses that travel to the spinal cord. Impulses return along parasympathetic nerves to the detrusor muscle, causing it to contract. At the same time, the internal urethral sphincter relaxes. If the external urethral sphincter is also voluntarily relaxed, urine flows through the urethra and out of the body, and the bladder is emptied. The usual characteristics of urine are displayed in this table. So what happens when we become dehydrated, like Charlie? Unfortunately, after going for a bushwalk on a hot summer's day, Charlie finds himself lost on the trail. He's run out of water and is suffering from dehydration. Dehydration is the result of excessive loss of body fluids through vapor in exhalation, sweating, micturition, and inadequate fluid intake. Symptoms that Charlie might be experiencing include a dry mouth, thirst, loss of skin resistance, muscle fatigue, dizziness, impaired cognitive function, and tachycardia. In extreme cases, dehydration can lead to death. But what are the feedback loops happening in Charlie's body in an attempt to maintain homeostasis? The first negative feedback loop involves the antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Charlie will experience a decrease in blood plasma through exercise and sweating, accompanied by inadequate water intake. As a result, his blood pressure and blood volume will drop. This is detected by the hypothalamus, which will rapidly release antidiuretic hormone from the posterior pituitary gland into the blood. The circulating ADH increases water absorption by increasing the water permeability of the DCTs and the collecting ducts. Remember, they are impermeable to water under normal circumstances. This water reabsorption will increase plasma volume and blood pressure. Simultaneously, we have another negative feedback loop occurring involving the hormone angiotensin. Our stimulus is the same. Charlie's blood pressure and plasma volume drop, but this time it is sensed by the juxtaglomerular apparatus, which release renin into the bloodstream. Renin triggers the formation of angiotensin II, which stimulates the release of aldosterone from the adrenal cortex. Aldosterone circulating in the blood increases reabsorption of sodium and secretion of potassium. This change will slowly increase the absorption of water via osmosis in order to balance the solute gradient. Angiotensin II also stimulates the secretion of ADH, creating an additional link between ADH and aldosterone mechanisms. In summary, the urinary system is composed of paired kidneys and ureters, a urinary bladder, and a urethra. Its purpose is to excrete, eliminate, and maintain homeostasis of the internal fluid environment. Each kidney contains over 1 million nephrons, which are the functional and structural units of the kidney. Nephrons filter blood and produce filtrate via the glomerular capsule and nephron tubules. Nephron tubules will reabsorb useful materials and secrete waste products as needed. Urine will drain into the renal pelvis through the ureters into the urinary bladder. Micturition is the process of eliminating urine through the urethra into the outside environment. If dehydration occurs, ADH and angiotensin will be released to increase reabsorption of water from glomerular filtrate, thus preserving fluid and decreasing and concentrating urine output. And finally, Charlie should have taken water and worn a hat. Thank you for viewing my presentation. I hope you find it interesting and informative.